Scott Allison is a professor of psychology at the University of Richmond in Virginia. His research program examines the psychology of heroism, leadership, and heroic leadership. He has served on the editorial boards of the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, Personality and Social Psychology Bulletin, and Group Dynamics. Plus, he's the editor-in-chief of Heroism Science, a peer-reviewed journal, which is the official journal of the Heroic Imagination Project. He has authored numerous books, including Heroes and Heroic Leadership, Real Heroes, spelled R-E-E-L, Conceptions of Leadership, and the Handbook of Heroism. He has published numerous journal articles, and his work has appeared in USA Today, New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, Slate Magazine, as well as Psychology Today. His work has also been featured on National Public Radio, MSNBC, and CBS. And with that, I present Dr. Scott Allison.
Hey everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? It's great to be here. And what an honor and privilege it is to talk to members of a humanist society. Fantastic. You are my people. And I study heroes. I am a psychologist, a social psychologist. And as a social psychologist, I study group dynamics and leadership. And around in the late O's, 2000 O's, around 2008, 2009, I was starting to get interested in heroism. And to my surprise, I discovered that nobody was studying heroism. It was quite strange. Let me share my slides. And so that's a terrible omission that we don't have people studying heroism as of 12 years ago. But the good news is about the same time I published my first book on heroism, Phil Zimbardo, and a lot of you will know that name, Phil Zimbardo at Stanford, who's retired, published an article on heroism, and he switched his whole research emphasis from evil, the studying the genesis of evil, to studying the genesis of moral virtue and heroism. And so now we have this new field of heroism science that I want to talk to you about today, along with heroism in general. And I'm going to keep my chat box open, because one of the first things I want to ask you is to write in the chat box who your heroes are. List some names for me. Type in your heroes. I want to know who they are. And there are no wrong answers here, because that's one of the things I've discovered about heroes and heroism, is that we all have different ideas about what a hero is. There's incredible disagreement about a hero. Epicurus, Dr. Fauci, Katherine Johnson, Johann Sebastian Bach, Susan B. Anthony, Dalai Lama, Galileo, Thomas Paine, Pinker, great musicians. This is good. I'm getting some good heroes here. Two grandmothers, Jane Jacobs. This is good. I'm glad you're typing in a lot of names. What we've found in our research is that when you ask people to list the names of their heroes, that people don't have any trouble listing their heroes. We were wondering, in this day and age, do people have heroes? And the answer is yes, they do. Teddy Roosevelt, Darwin, Eleanor Roosevelt. A lot of great names here. All right, so now your next job is to tell me why they're your heroes. And in answering this question, why these folks are your heroes, give me an adjective, list some traits or adjectives that make these folks your heroes. So when you think of your hero or your heroes, plural, what traits do they have that make them heroic? I see courage, humane. Let's see some more adjectives and traits in the chat box. Bravery, intelligence, perseverance, moral courage, which is different from physical courage, as we know, brave, innovative, just, and humane. This is good. This is good. You're hitting the major dimensions of heroism here. Fantastic. Thank you. Guidance, smart, knowledgeable, persistent, grandmothers who knew how to survive and love and dream. Wow, wow, what a great answer that is. So generally speaking, when you ask people to list the names of heroes, you get two categories. No big surprise here. You get the cultural heroes. Cultural heroes are people about whom there's a societal consensus. There's a lot of consensus around certain heroes like Martin Luther King Jr. and Gandhi and Batman, Superman, Nelson Mandela. But then we also get personal heroes, and these are people personal to you, and they can be, someone mentioned grandmother. We get a lot of, since I'm at a university, a lot of the college students will say parents or siblings are their personal heroes. But we also get personal heroes who are coaches or teachers, someone very personal to them who had a huge effect on their personal growth. So these are the two different categories of heroism. And when we started out doing research on heroism, we've discovered that depending on how you ask the question, like if you ask people just to list the names of heroes, you tend to get the cultural heroes. But if you ask people who are your heroes, you'll get more personal heroes. So you'll get different answers for who your heroes are, depending on how you ask the question. Okay, so we did research, our first book, we identified the great 8 traits of heroes by asking people to list the traits of heroes. And we got hundreds of adjectives, hundreds of traits, and we subjected those hundreds of traits to multivariate statistical analyses like factor analysis, cluster analysis. And all those hundreds of traits of heroes were reduced to these 8 categories. And you mentioned a lot of them. When I asked you to list the traits of heroes in the chat box, you mentioned smart, strong, and under the category of strong is courage. So a lot of you mentioned bravery and courage. That goes under the strong category. Selflessness, reliability, resilience, charisma, caring, and inspirational. And we call it these are the great 8 traits of heroes. And when we started out studying heroes, and no one had been researching heroes for some reason until 10, 12 years ago, one of the things that surprised us when we started studying heroism was the fact that we first thought, our initial thinking was, well, heroes and villains are 180-degree opposites. They're on opposite sides of this continuum. It turns out not to be the case. We discovered there's a fine line between a hero and a villain. And evidence of that lies in the fact that, look at these great 8 traits of heroes. Well, it turns out when we ask people, what are the traits of villains? Villains share 5 of these 8 traits. So the majority of these hero traits are also villain traits. And I'm sure you can see which of these 5 grade 8 traits of heroes are also 8 traits of villainy. Smart, so villains can be intelligent. Villains can be strong and courageous. Villains can be resilient. Villains can be charismatic and inspire people. They're inspirational. So 5 of the traits, the major categories of traits of heroes, are shared by villains. And so that's one piece of evidence that there's this fine line between a hero and a villain, which is a little unfortunate. And that probably can explain why we have a great culture war and this great political divide right now. We've discovered that, 2 people, you can sit 2 people down and they would agree pretty quickly on the definition of a hero. So you get a pretty quick agreement about what a hero is defined as. And yet those same 2 people who agree on the definition will disagree vehemently about who meets that definition. And so some people will say Donald Trump meets that definition, and other people will say, well, no, he doesn't. But that's not just true for Trump. It's true for, I live in the South. I'm in Richmond, the former capital of the Confederacy. And people here, well, who's the hero, Lee or Grant? And it depends which side or where you were raised. Now, I was raised, my parents were Northerners, so it was Grant, obviously. I married my dear, wonderful wife, born and raised here in Richmond. And it's like, no, it's not so clear who the hero and the villain is. And so this is one of the interesting things about studying heroism, is that it's muddier. It's muddier than we ever would have imagined in terms of defining what a hero is, and the subjectivity and the widespread disagreement about who meets the criteria, who checks all the boxes of heroism. And one person's hero is another person's villain, etc. Now, this is an Irish group, Kinsella, Ritchie, and Igao they extended our research on the grade 8 traits of heroes, and they did a more sophisticated prototype analysis showing there's central categories, central traits of heroes and peripheral traits of heroes. And you can see this is a more finely tuned, this is more fine tuning here about the traits. So now you've got a lot of the grade 8 traits of heroes in these central and peripheral characteristics, and as well as some other ones like protection and conviction and humility, etc. All right. Now, one of the most fascinating things to me is, and I'm sure you can all appreciate this, since you were, before the meeting started today, people were talking about, I guess it's Darwin's birthday coming up soon, tomorrow maybe. And one of the things we know is that humans not just evolve from hundreds, thousands of years ago, millions of years ago to today, but each individual human life evolves. And so this is a great Oscar Wilde quote to me that shows how we are made and designed to evolve as human beings during our lifespans. And every saint has a past, and every sinner has a future. What a great quote, saying that basically this quote is saying, Oscar Wilde is saying that heroes are not born heroes. Every hero had to go through stuff to get to where they're a hero. To become heroic requires bumps along the road, suffering, some setback, some pain. And that's how we grow from suffering. And then every sinner has a future, so that there's, no matter how hard things are, however difficult our lives are, we know this, those of us with gray in our hair, we know that that we can overcome obstacles, and that we can grow from setback, and that from great suffering becomes great growth. So I like this quote because this is what interests me about heroism, is that it's dynamic, it's evolving, it's the human journey. The hero journey is the human journey. I'm convinced of that. Joseph Campbell, all of you know Joseph Campbell, who was a mythologist who studied human mythology across different parts of the planet at different human time periods. And Joseph Campbell found that all hero mythology tells the same story. And he, of course, wrote this great book in 1949, Joseph Campbell did, called The Hero with a Thousand Faces, because every hero story, whether it's Harry Potter or Luke Skywalker, it's the same story. The hero goes through a life with stages of development, and it's the human lifespan. Erik Erikson, some of you may know that lifespan human developmental psychologists like Erik Erikson and others, many others, have proposed different stages of life that follow the hero's journey, the pattern of the hero's journey in hero storytelling and mythology. And we know that where the hero grows the most is during those times when the hero suffers the most. And the troubles of our lives often bear great gifts if we're willing to be and able to be resilient and courageous and resourceful. So the heroic life is not avoiding suffering. The heroic life is what you do with your suffering. And this turns out to be key to every philosophical and spiritual tradition. We know Christianity, the symbol of Christianity is a human being suffering on the cross. The Four Noble Truths of Buddhism are an acknowledgement of the inevitability of suffering. Judaism, suffering in their mythology. 12-step programs like AA, they begin with an acknowledgement that we're step one, we admitted we're powerless over our addiction and that we're suffering. Our lives are unmanageable. And then it's again, the growth in recovery work, the growth in being a Christian or a Buddhist or a Hindu or a Muslim is through suffering. So it's never about avoiding the suffering. It's about what you do with the suffering. And one of the things I've discovered is that heroes transcend their suffering. They transcend it. Villains, they succumb to their suffering. They cannot, they avoid transforming as a result of suffering. So they succumb to it. And we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. So we have this purpose of all of our human journeys, all of you and every hero in literature, every hero in the movies and literature is growing, evolving, transforming. And of course, there are many images for that. And the classic one is the butterfly. And we know that the caterpillar transforms in the cocoon, and there's got to be some suffering involved in the chrysalis, in the process of transforming, of metamorphosis from caterpillar to butterfly. So heroic transformation. If you think whoever your great hero is, whether you listed your grandmother or you listed Mandela as your hero, any one of those heroes you listed in the chat box, those heroes, they transformed. They became something better. And it explains the appeal of all the storytelling that we love. So the transformation literally means to change form, and religions call it whatever they want to call it: conversion, salvation, liberation. Greeks call it metamorphosis, Buddhists and Hindus enlightenment, Christians resurrection, and 12-step programs call it an awakening. And so the 12th and final step of addiction recovery programs is having had a spiritual awakening. And that means that there's something healing about the heroic transformation process. There's healing. See, I'm getting some questions here. And I'll get to Andy's question in a minute, because I think we're going to get there. We're going to talk about healing in a bit. So then that question is, the question that rises is what's changing when heroes undergo a transformation? What's going on here? What exactly is changing? And here's a list of things that can be changing. Your traits, your personality can change. Your priorities in life can change. Your whole calling, your purpose, your mission, the meaning, the whole meaning of your existence can change. Your whole identity, how you see yourself, and your role in the universe. The narrative identity, which is the story you tell. When people ask, who are you? You have a story. Your entire worldview, your paradigm, it's like a Kuhnian paradigm shift. When you undergo heroic transformation, it's a very, very big overhaul of who you and what you are. And once again, human lifespan developmental psychologists will tell you that there are stages of human life from birth to death where we're developmentally going through stages. And the human journey is the hero's journey. And so now that gets me to the field of heroes in science, because we seek to understand this process of how heroes become heroes and how humans become their best self. So this is why speaking to a humanist society is so perfect, because the humanists like Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers, I mean, these are folks who understood that growth is transformative and people are able and are designed to reach their full potential, given the right conditions, of course. So heroism science, we want to know where heroism comes from. Where does it come from? How do we become our most heroic selves? How do we become our best selves? And what functions do heroes play in our lives? All the heroes you listed in the chat box and all the heroes you have and you read about in novels and watch on TV, what do they do? What do they provide us psychologically? What are those functions? And the processes involved. What are the psychological processes, emotional, physical, spiritual, cosmological? Many different kind of processes are implicated in heroism. And then what are the consequences? Having led a heroic life, what does that accomplish for you and for society? And so those are the theories, and I'm in that first category of the theorists. But there are applied practitioners of heroism science who want to train people to be heroic and foster a sense of well-being and to promote heroic awareness and action and civic responsibility and engagement. And Phil Zimbardo, in fact, has devoted his life with the Heroic Imagination Project to training heroes and turning everyday people who don't think they've got heroic potential, but turning everyday people into folks who can be heroic and who are willing to stand up and step up and speak out and do the right thing and say what needs to be said and do what needs to be done to better society. So we have these goals of heroism science and applied heroism science. All right, so now the scientific definition of heroism, which is, again, it's kind of muddy because there's a lot of interpretational subjectivity involved in what heroism is. So we have this objective definition of heroism because we're scientists. We're trying to define the phenomenon we're studying the same way a scientist studying trees would want to define what a tree is, or a scientist studying birds wants to understand what a bird is. We're trying to understand what a hero is. So a hero engages in voluntary action aimed toward the greater good. And it's not just a good action, it's exceptional good. So, holding the door open for someone when you enter a building, that's not quite, doesn't meet the threshold for exceptional good. It's nice. Then there's it's the idea of self-sacrifice being an important part of a hero. Heroes, to be a hero, you've got to be sacrificing something and taking risks. So these are the boxes you check if someone is a hero or not, according to the objective view of heroism. Now, there's also the subjective approach to heroism, which argues that there can be no objectivity because one person's hero is another person's villain. And it's all in the eye of the beholder. And maybe that's unfortunate that it is in the eye of the beholder. It'd be kind of nice if we were all on the same page about who a hero was, but we're not. And so there's a lack of objectivity that you don't see with studying trees or studying birds. But when it comes to heroism, there's a lot of, I guess, moral ambiguity. So those of us like myself who study the subjective approach will often look at people's intuitive beliefs about heroism. So I study what people believe a hero is and how it evolves over time, and how when you're young, you may have one definition of a hero. For example, when I was a kid, baseball players were heroes because they could hit a ball a long way. Well, now being strong and being competent athletically isn't enough for me. And I think for most people, over time, throughout your life, your heroes evolve and change and grow. And now my heroes are more moral and ethical based than they are competency based. And maybe that's true for you too. We've already talked about the grade 8 traits of heroes. So I'm just going to go to the next slide. Now, what are the functions of heroes? And there's at least 7 to 10 functions, and here are 7 of them. Heroes give us hope. So that's a very important thing, that heroes are beacons of hope for us. We live in a pretty dark world. And so when someone can rise above the darkness and shine a light of hope, that's someone we gravitate to, and we love people who give us hope. Wisdom, heroes offer us wisdom. And this is a very important function in terms of storytelling. The stories you read, the novels you've read, the plays you've read featuring a hero character, these heroes, these movies, these stories, these novels, they're not just entertaining you. I've had to tell my students over and over again, you know, you think you're going to the movies, you think you're watching Netflix to be entertained. You know, you realize you're drawn to these stories because these heroes are calling you. They're teaching you how to live a life, how to overcome adversity. So you're watching the hero experience setback, get in struggle, make terrible mistakes, have a terrible health setback, you know, disease, divorce, disaster, you name it. The hero has to somehow be redeem themselves. And so there's wisdom here. These stories we're drawn to, these hero stories and hero mythology, is all about educating people about their place in the universe and what they're called to do. Hero stories are calling us to go on the same journey as the protagonist in the story. So they're modeling wise behaviors and morality. They are, here's another function. They defend and protect us. We know that another function of heroism is that heroes make us feel better. There are positive emotions that come out of watching a hero story, reading about a hero story. We feel better. They help us achieve our goals. So we may have personal goals. For example, in my research on heroes, I know that little kids who play soccer will have a soccer hero, an Olympic soccer hero, as their inspiration to help them achieve the goal of being the best soccer player they can be. So goal achievement, another important function of heroism. There's also this curious thing that when you think about your hero, it makes you less lonely. It's really interesting. The social connection idea was a little bit of a surprise to me, but the data are showing that just thinking about certain heroes helps you feel less lonely, builds a sense of community and connection, and you feel more socially connected. All right, so here's Joseph Campbell again, talking about the stages of the hero's journey. And the first stage is the hero leaves home and goes out on a journey. Now, the journey doesn't have to be geographic necessarily. It can be the journey is not a physical or geographic journey necessarily. It often is. We often we leave home, like we go away to college or we go somewhere. Some people join the Peace Corps and they go to Africa or where they go to help people. But sometimes the journey is at home. If you get a diagnosis for an illness, a severe illness, that's your journey. And now you've been thrown away from the safe, familiar world. And now you're on the dangerous world, but you haven't left home. So the journey can be physical or metaphorical. Every hero at the outset of the journey, when they're summoned, when they're called to go on the journey, every hero in storytelling is missing something. They're missing an important inner quality that they lack, which of course becomes the key to transformation. So because they lack something vitally important in themselves, they struggle and they suffer. Heroes are often in great pain. And the good news is, and we all know this, is that there's help, and we're not supposed to do this journey alone. We get help from friends, companions, allies, mentors. And this is the great beauty of the hero's journey is we're not alone. We have people to help us. And through adversity and through mentoring, we find what's missing. And maybe what's missing is courage. Maybe what's missing is resilience. Maybe what's missing is insight into the world or insight about ourselves. But this is the transformation, is we become transformed as a result of the setbacks, the obstacles, and the help we receive. And that helps us complete our mission. And then this last stage, to me, is the most heroic stage. If you look at the first 6 bullets on this list, that's about survival. those first, everything but the last bullet on this screen is personal survival. So what separates survival, mere survival, from heroism is that last step where the hero gives back, is of service to people, and shares what they've learned from being on this arduous, painful journey. The hero at the very end shares what they've learned with the community, and they give back. And Campbell called it bestowing a boon to society, giving back. So what are these missing inner qualities that the heroes lack when they start out? And self-confidence is a big one, that people are often very insecure and they don't think they're worthy, and they don't know who they are, and they don't think they're worth much. So they're lacking self-confidence. But then interestingly, you can have the opposite problem. And this is a very Shakespearean tragedy characteristic, humility, where there's a lot of hubris, and what heroes need to be knocked down a peg sometimes. And they're not lacking self-confidence. They've got too much self-confidence, and they need to be humbled in some way. And there's courage and resilience, which I've talked about as more qualities. And one thing I have to say, which may sound obvious, but maybe isn't obvious, is that you cannot wake up one morning and say, you know what, I've decided to be resilient. I'm going to be resilient. I'm going to be courageous. Courage and resilience can only be gotten through struggling with horrible, painful circumstances. One of my favorite quotes, George Bataille said that mere words have a quicksand quality about them. Experience is the rope that is thrown to us. And so resilience and courage, these are heroic qualities that you can only get through struggle, through putting people through difficult circumstances. And I think as a college professor, and I see how fragile my students are today compared to 30 years ago, I think we've deprived our kids of resilience building challenging circumstances, because maybe it's the iPhone, maybe technology, it's our gadgets, our devices. Kids today just don't seem to have as much resilience and courage, or resilience especially, as they used to. And maybe that's because of helicopter parenting, over-parenting. I'm not sure what. Another missing quality is heart, that often, if you like the movie Groundhog Day with Bill Murray, he finds his heart. The Tin Man was looking for a heart in The Wizard of Oz. The fundamental truth about oneself, and that's the brain from The Wizard of Oz. So now we go to The Wizard of Oz, and Dorothy is thrown into, she's in her safe, familiar world, Kansas, and then something horrible, something usually unwelcome and unsought, throws us into the dangerous, unfamiliar world. Most of us don't really go on the hero's journey voluntarily. We're thrown into it involuntarily, kicking and screaming, like Dorothy here. So now there she is in the land of munchkins and witches and apple throwing trees and flying monkeys, and she's in this dangerous world. But the good news is she has help from friends, and not coincidentally, the brain and the heart and the courage that her three friends are looking for are also things that Dorothy lacks, but she helps get them. By helping them achieve those things, she achieves them. And of course, she's sent on a mission to get the broom of the Wicked Witch, and she's got to be resourceful and a bit lucky too, but she made her luck with her courage. She had to be so courageous and resourceful. Then she says, well, how do I get home? And she learns that home is not a geographical location. Home is wherever the people you love are located. Home is when you feel comfortable any place with anyone. You're comfortable in your own skin, and you're with loved ones. So there she is, waking up enlightened. And it's a great movie, as you know, but if I have one big criticism of the movie, is that last stage is missing. Dorothy needed to go become a motivational speaker. We needed to see Dorothy help others and be of service to the world and share her transformation with the world. We don't see that. It's still a great movie, but it's lacking the last stage of giving back. All right, now let's look at images, because there's so many. People are moved by images more than by words. We are very much visual creatures. So images are very important to us. And there are images of heroic transformation. Look at this painting. A friend of mine, Zoe Weil, who's head of the Institute for Humane Education. Zoe's a painter. She paints this. She posts this painting on Facebook. And what got my attention is she called it transformation. And I'm so into heroic transformation and how we evolve and how we transform. And if you look at this painting, and you can see things are being transformed from inanimate objects to living things, from single cell living things to complex multicellular organisms. And if you're really observant, you'll notice a symbol of transformation here that people often don't get is the spiral image. Look at the spirals. It turns out the spiral image is pervasive in storytelling. Now that I've told you this, you're going to start noticing spirals in wherever you go. Spiral is a very powerful symbol. That's why you see spiral shapes in galaxies, in hurricanes, in tornadoes, in flowers, it connotes power and change. You're going to start noticing spirals where you hadn't seen it before. For example, look at that. Did you know the Wizard of the Yellow Brick Road begins with the spiral? And so there you go. The whole journey, Dorothy's journey of heroic transformation begins with the spiral. And you're going to see spirals jump out at you now, I guarantee it. Another image of transformation is the tree. And my goodness, you have a small acorn developing into a mighty oak tree. If that isn't transformation, nothing is. So we have tree images. I think even Darwin talked about the tree of life. Birds and flight. Here's another big image, flying. That was, I mean, imagine in evolutionary history, the transformation from living in the sea to living on land, and then from land into the air. Amazing. So that's an important image of transformation, especially images of things flying that we don't think of as being able to fly. Bridges. Here's another image of transformation. And of course, the bridge isn't really an interesting bridge to go on unless it has some danger, a little rickety. Like, I don't know if I'd want to go on this bridge. It looks a little dangerous and rickety, but again, heroes take risks. And if you had to go from one side of this ravine to the other side, you might have to take this bridge to be the hero. And of course, there's images of butterflies, which we talked about. And there are all other animal images like the tadpole, right? The tadpole and the frog is similar image of transformation. Now, this is fascinating to me because the snake is another image of transformation, especially healing. And healing and transformative growth go hand in hand. And these are the three symbols of the American Medical Association, the British Medical Association, and the, what's the other one? The Australian, the other one, the one on the top left is the Australian Medical Association. They all have the snake going up the scepter. And I thought, well, all right, that's just a very British, Anglo-based image. Surely the rest of the world doesn't use that image. But it turns out that if you look at the Indonesian Medical Association or the Israeli or the Nigerian in Africa, they use the same image of the snake. All right, shadows and reflections. You're going to see there are so many stories involve people looking down at an image of themselves in water or in the mirror or in there as a shadow. Now, the Hero Construction Company is an organization devoted to helping middle school kids be heroic. And so here's a kid looking at an image of him, a shadow, as a kind of a fierce warrior. This is the story of the tiger and the goat. And this is where this story, you may know it, where the tiger is abandoned as a cub, a young cub. and is adopted by goats. And so this young tiger thinks he's a goat. His whole life, he grows up thinking he's a goat until he looks himself in the water and sees that he's really a tiger, and his true identity is revealed. And storytelling and hero storytelling, that secret identity is very important. Notice superheroes tend to have secret identities. Bruce Wayne and Batman, Clark Kent and Superman, Diana Prince and Wonder Woman. And I think what they're telling us is that all of us have a case of amnesia, where we're not really even aware of our heroic potential, and that we're not aware that we're all destined and designed to become our best heroic selves. And so we've got many, many, many stories where the hero has amnesia, a kind of amnesia as to their true heroic identity, whether it's Cinderella or the ugly duckling who grows into the beautiful swan. These stories are designed to remind us, and again, this is that wisdom function of storytelling, the educational function, trying to teach kids I thought all those years I was reading my daughter bedtime stories, I thought I was just trying to put her to sleep. When really I was imparting wisdom to her, including the dark fairy tales like Grimm's fairy tales, where Hansel and Gretel are being thrown into the oven, and there's witches and death and spells what we know now is those stories that were pretty dark and grim are designed to help kids develop resourcefulness. How did Hansel and Gretel escape that witch? How did Goldilocks, escape the big bad wolf? So we have, and the three little pigs, that's the big bad wolf, right? I think. So we have wisdom and all these missing inner qualities. Look how the hero is missing courage, resilience, resourcefulness, fundamental insight about the world. This is how they got it. This is how they extricated themselves from difficult situations. And this is how you can do it too someday. So we have many different kinds of heroic transformation. And here are 6 different kinds. Emotional transformation, basing on, these are emotional ones, are transformations of the heart, compassion, courage, and humility. And then mental transformations involving intelligence, creativity, worldly knowledge. Physical transformations, which superhero stories are obsessed with, is physical mutations into something great. Spiritual transformations, beliefs about the nature of God or the universe. Moral transformations, how we become like in the Groundhog Day and in A Christmas Carol, Ebenezer Scrooge. So we have moral transformations, and then motivational changes as a result of something dramatic happening in someone's life. Often a great loss shifts our calling and our motivation. Let's see, it's a little after 2 o'clock. Dawn or Fred, should I keep going or should I wrap up?
Why don't you go ahead and keep going? We got some, as long as you got time.
I do. I have a few more slides. I just don't want to go over time.
No problem.
All right. So William James writes this incredible book over 100 years ago on the varieties of religious experience. And now William James is an atheist, but he's a scientist. He's got the scientific mind as a philosopher and as the first psychologist too. He wrote the first psychology textbook. He's fascinated by religiously transformed people, people who seemingly overnight, although not necessarily, because among the varieties of religious experience are the slow, gradual awakening versus the sudden overnight transformation. But what he did is, without being a believer himself, he identified several different ways people experience religious conversion, and they seem to map onto heroic transformation. I'm fascinated by, I'm not that religious a person. I like to think of myself as a spiritual person, more secularist. But there's no denying that when people are affected by religion in a positive way, or have a deep spiritual core like Thich Nhat Hanh or Dalai Lama or Richard Rohr, they have a lot of these characteristics: a sense of love, peace, harmony, and wellness, a sense of clarity. They see life clearly and lucidly. They see truth. They recognize truth. There's a freshness, a newness to their perception of the world. There's increase in well-being and happiness. This is huge. This idea of being part, a sense of being part of something bigger than yourself. This is, if you want to Google, I suggest you Google this, being part of something bigger than yourself. Just Google that phrase and you get millions of hits. How many people are into this and how much human beings crave being connected to something larger than themselves. Increased charity and generosity. So now here we get at the more like prototypically heroic characteristics, being philanthropist and being a humanitarian. But you can see that these map onto heroic transformation. A lot of the stuff, having a sense of love and harmony and giving and charity and clarity and generosity. They also map onto near-death experiences. Now, if there's like 25 or 30 of you here on this call, statistically, 2 or 3 of you have had a near-death experience. And what we know about NDEs is that there's a significant proportion of people with near-death experiences who are transformed by those experiences and are in the following ways. They tend to be better able to live in the present moment. And again, these map onto heroic transformation in my research. They're more confident. They're less interested in consumerism and materialism. They're more spiritual in one sense or another. They're more compassionate toward their fellow humans. They believe life has a purpose. They believe in the connectedness of everything and everyone. There's the sense of awe and wonder and gratitude for everything. There's a preference for solitude, and yet ironically, there's this greater social and participatory side to to NDA people as well. So to me, this is fascinating. And one reason why I'm fascinated by the parallel between heroic transformation and NDE experiences is that, oh gosh, that Thomas Merton, the great Catholic monk, said that in any morally evolving person, there is a death. And what dies is your false self. Your false self dies, according to Thomas Merton, and your true self is what emerges. Kind of like the caterpillar is not what the caterpillar is meant to be forever. The caterpillar was always meant to be this beautiful, incredible flying butterfly. So the whole idea of something needs to die in order for something to live. And what dies is the old identity. And Richard Rohr called it in his book, Falling Upward, that first stage of life where we're trying to carve out a career and a family and buy a house and a car. And then in the second half of life, we realize that none of that, the house and the car and the career were not really that important, or can't really do everything. And what we need is more, a greater purpose. We have to be part of something bigger than ourselves and give back. And that's what heroes do. They go through these heroic stages of change and growth. And I think now is a good time as any to stop and take questions and get a discussion going. I don't claim to have all the answers, but I love discussing possible ideas and suggestions and hearing your thoughts. So the floor is open.
Okay, thank you, Scott. Appreciate that. As you pointed out, Andy had asked a question earlier about what is the difference, what is the main attribute of a hero? I went to the wrong place. What is the difference between respecting someone for their achievements compared to respecting someone considering someone a hero?
Yeah, that's a good question. See, the main attribute of a hero is to evoke emotion. That's really, Andy, are you there? Can you elaborate on what you mean by a hero evoking emotion rather than accomplishing something?
Yeah, a lot of times you hear people who have failed and they're considered heroes. A lot of times, like policemen or firemen or something run into a building, they haven't really achieved anything, but they're giving, maybe it's gratuitous in that sense. But like say, two of the people I greatly respect, and I don't consider them heroes. One is Baruch Spinoza, and the other one is Carl Icahn. They're totally different, but they both have achieved at the time in my life great things. You know, like Carl Icahn shook up the capitalist system with his takeover at TWA, and Spinoza in the 1700s. It never fails to amaze me how intricately he studied the Old Testament and got excommunicated for it. So they had great achievements, but I doubt very much if anybody consider them heroes. But when you went through your lecture, mostly it was like the hero had to evoke emotions in either themselves or in the other person, like Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter really didn't accomplish much, but he's considered a hero by a lot of people. And that's what I'm trying to differentiate.
Wow. Yeah, it is complicated, isn't it? Because I remember Carter's presidency. Most of us here do. And it wasn't a great presidency, really. But boy, has he been the best former president. I mean, what a humanitarian, what incredible wisdom and heart and compassion. And so you are right that heroism is more than just an accomplishment. Oftentimes it's an intention. So if you try to save someone's life and fail, are you as much of a hero? Are you still a hero as someone who saves, tries, and succeeds? And my thinking is, yeah. And think of all the women's suffrage movement and all the women who failed to give women the right to vote. It finally did happen. And the people who get the credit for it are the people who succeeded in changing the laws in 1920 to give women the right to vote in our country. But they couldn't have done it without all the women who had tried and failed, who preceded them, right?
Well, if I could say one other thing, look at Bill Gates. He's given away tons of money, or even the Amazon's wife was giving lots of money. They've done a lot more than Jimmy Carter has as far as helping other people and the poor, yet they're not considered heroes.
Exactly right. Well, maybe some of them do.
Well,
I actually have friends who think that, Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and Bill Gates are heroes. And
sure.
I think it's complicated. You could point to heroic things they've done. And I think everyone is complicated. And, one of the problems is with our human, as a psychologist, and this as just people who experience the world, is people tend to think in terms of dichotomies, all or nothing. People, you're either on my team or the other team. You're either a hero or a villain. And we're human beings are not very good at seeing nuance and subtlety. And here in Virginia, Thomas Jefferson designed the state capitol, founded UVA right up the road. Thomas Jefferson is very controversial. Some people put him on the pedestal. Some people vilify him. And what do we do with that? What do we do with people who did great things, but may have done some crappy things too? What do we do with people like that? And we're trying to sort through that as a society. And are these space billionaires heroes or not? And I'm looking at the gray. I see, they're doing some good, but I see some damage they may be doing. So it's hard. This is getting at the subjectivity. It's very hard to define or agree on who a hero is. And it is a muddled, messy, gray area for many of us to sort through. And reasonable people will disagree. And I think that's an important thing for us to acknowledge, that reasonable people will disagree on what heroism and who is a hero, who's met the criteria, who's met the threshold for heroism. And that's just life. Life is messy. But you've raised a great question. Thank you, Andy. I love your cat too.
Thank you. Robert Bosca had a question and then also has his hand raised. And his question Isn't the reason for secret identities of heroes being to protect their loved ones from the villains?
Oh, and the superheroes genre. Isn't that interesting? Yeah, yeah, that could be. Or yeah, that's a good point. But still, you can't deny that there are secret identities and embedded in stories like Cinderella, where people are royalty. There are a lot of stories, not just Cinderella, where someone's royalty, but they don't know they're royalty, or they're going to become royalty. So I don't know, Robert, if you want to elaborate on that, but I know that in The Ugly Duckling, and there's just so many stories where a person, the character is shortchanging themselves, and they don't understand that if they just hold on, they can become the hero.
Yeah. The reason why I put my hand up also, well, I think it was just because you put up the slide that all had superheroes.
Yeah.
Alternate things that, it came as a different explanation for what was going on besides
I like that.
protecting their loved ones.
I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah. But the other thing about dichotomies is groups that are considered heroes, like particularly with the current COVID. At some point, there was a thing about saying, like all our doctors and nurses being heroes in the battle against COVID, and not distinguish, like it was related. What made me think of it was Andy's point about achievements versus like categorizing or emotional things, because that category, if you're putting a whole group, it's an emotional thing, not based on merit or achievement. A similar thing is soldiers being considered heroes, war soldiers, whereas some of them committed atrocities, others were didn't do anything brave. They mostly participated in the war in a clerical capacity and weren't particularly brave or anything, and yet the whole group is considered heroes or not.
Wow. So, well, isn't that to me, that speaks to the danger of lumping everyone into one category. And it also, it turns out I'm writing an article right now on healthcare heroes and how a lot of them during the COVID pandemic have resented being called a hero, because apparently, and I think there's some merit to their thinking is that, well, what you're doing is you're giving us this label hero without any of the support, without the PPEs, without the masks, without taking the vaccine, without doing everything that you could be doing to help us. So stop calling us a hero and help us out. And so I'm actually developing an exchange model of the hero and the follower of the hero, so that it becomes clear that heroes need more than just worship and adulation and admiration. Heroes need our support, especially during times of major societal crisis.
So Aya had a question and also has her hand raised. So Aya asked you, what motivated you to study heroes? And Aya, did you have anything else you wanted to ask at the same time? You'll need to unmute yourself, Aya.
Okay, now
I hear you.
Yes, my question, because I'm thinking the connection to political discourse and propaganda, if I say, I'm thinking of the word heroes and how often in my mind, it's connected to politics and the cultural advancements and talk. And then when I'm thinking of other words which are familiar to me, like my Finnish word sankari or Swedish word hjälte or Russian word geroi, that the connection to politics and propaganda. Could you say something about that? Because there's danger, I think, in that. And also, who of us, you made me think of, do I, like, subjectively, do I ever think even or say that I am a hero? I would like to say I am a hero of my own life, in my own life, but otherwise that it's really who is hero is in the eye of the other people or
Now
culture.
that's interesting. Like that last question is a good one. We ask people to reminisce about heroes. 80% of the time they're nostalgic about other people as heroes, but 20%, 1 in 5 people thinks of a time in their life when they were a hero, like maybe they overcame cancer or they overcame a painful divorce. So when we think about who a hero is, sometimes we do give ourselves credit for heroically overcoming a terrible setback. And maybe we should, if we've overcome a terrible disease or a painful divorce, maybe we do deserve to pat ourselves on the back and say, you know, I was resourceful, I was resilient, and I did grow and become my best self as a result of these terrible things. So, but most of the time, 80% of the time, we find when you're asked to think about heroes, past heroes from the past or heroism, they think of other people as heroes, others, like family, usually family members, actually. Every once in a while, they'll think of a political hero. Liberals think of Barack Obama. They're nostalgic for the days of Obama being president. Conservatives are nostalgic about Reagan. But it's more often than not, it's family members, their grandmother, someone who made a big impact on them when they were younger. Your question about politics is interesting. Just before the pandemic in 2019, I was in Germany, gave a talk at the University of Freiburg, and the faculty there were telling me that even in Germany, 77 years after the end of World War II, 77 years after Hitler, they were telling me in Germany that they distrust anyone who is a hero. They distrust the word leader. The word leadership and the word hero or heroism, it gives them a kind of a suspicion, a little cynicism. They don't like those words, leadership and hero, because of their cultural past. It makes sense. I understand it. And I don't know much about propaganda, but I do know that heroes will spin tales, heroes and leaders, for good and for ill. And we're talking about villains too. So now we're talking about heroes and villains in positions of power will spin narratives to heighten their power, heighten their control, heighten their grip, to brainwash, to influence. And this is very important that we're aware of that narratives are used to win hearts and minds of people. And we've got to be suspicious of those narratives and question them and think about them critically. Unfortunately, human beings don't like to think critically or are unable to think critically and often just swallow the narrative.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so a couple comments we had about William James. Frank Robinson noted earlier that William James was not an atheist. Then also Donna stated William James confessed that he didn't have an experience with God, but respected people who did. Then provided a quote from William James: "Be not afraid of life, believe that life is worth living, and your belief will help create the fact." And she noted that also appears in the New Testament.
Okay, let me say this about William James. I'm a big William James fan. When he was a young man in his 20s, he went through a personal crisis. He kind of had a breakdown, a depressive breakdown. He was incredibly depressed and had feelings of helplessness and hopelessness. He believed that nothing he did mattered, nothing I do matters. But because he was so smart and he was kind of an experimental psychologist, he did a little experiment on himself. He said, all right, I'm in a terrible place. For the next year, I am going to act as if everything I do matters. And so for the next year, he acted as if everything he did matters. And this is getting at what Donna said, the belief creates reality. At the end of the year, he was 1,000% happier. He had, his relationships were stronger. His career was on a promising track. And so this is really interesting. So you can see why he was a great philosopher and a great psychologist, because he was one of the very first people who discovered and who taught us that belief creates reality. That, you know, if you look for the bad, you'll find the bad. If you look for the good in people, you'll find the good. If you look for the good in any situation, you'll find it. If you look for the bad in any situation, you'll find it. So seek and ye shall find. And he found that this self-fulfilling prophecy emerges in the way we perceive the world and in our well-being. And it's great that he gave us that gift and really set a course of psychology. Modern day cognitive psychology and clinical and counseling psychology borrow from that mindset of optimism, of efficacy, feeling effective and efficacious in the world. Matters. It matters. And it doesn't even matter whether what you do matters or not. It's just whether you believe what you do matters or not. It's the belief more than the reality that creates change and heroism, I would argue.
Yes, I agree. I've always thought that if you tell yourself you're happy or having a good time, you'll have a good time. But we had another comment here from Jonas, a question that's not quite as happy a note, shall we say, but again, about heroes. Why should we waste our time about heroes while we have Donald Trump hero to 87 million, regardless what other people say about him?
Well, isn't that an argument for why we desperately need to be studying heroes? Because if we have, I totally agree that we have a problem on our hands if we can't see and recognize evil when it's staring us in the face. I think we have a problem. And we have to recognize, first of all, that the German people during the 1930s, as Hitler was gaining power, this is not something you're going to want to hear or even agree with, but the data show that good, decent German people supported Hitler. And that you're thinking, well, how could good, decent people support Hitler? The same way good, decent people can support Donald Trump, because he says enough of the right things. He is checking enough of the boxes in terms of, well, I am pro-America, I am pro-Christian, I am pro-white. And so if your group and your group identity is being validated by someone, that's going to give you blinders about what's really going on. And that should be a warning for us, that when our group identities are being exploited and manipulated. So I don't have a good answer other than we have a lot of work to do as a society to cultivate more enlightened thinking about. I've been saying for years that we have tremendous leadership illiteracy. We have a leadership illiteracy problem, meaning we don't know a good leader from a bad leader. We can't distinguish a good from a bad leader in our country. And we get manipulated by people who are very tribal and want to pit us against each other. One of my criteria, the main criteria for distinguishing a hero from a villain is heroes unify people, villains divide people. And so if someone is speaking in a let's divide people kind of way, that should be a red flag. Heroes unify and unite, villains divide. And all the great villains, I use the word great, all of the horrible villains in history, whether it's Stalin or Hitler or Mao or Trump, they divide people. That should be a red flag. But we have leadership illiteracy, so we don't even know that that's a problem, which is kind of alarming. We must not be teaching this in the schools, that divisiveness is bad. Pitting groups against each other is wrong and harmful. Why don't we know that? Why wasn't that obvious to people? especially given human history. We've got so much human history that clearly shows that heroes like Mandela and Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. unite and villains divide. We have all this information in our history, yet we don't seem to pay attention to it.
Okay, and we have another comment here that just came in from Hanum that says, by using sacrifice as a main criteria for hero, wouldn't that eliminate fake heroes, i.e., in my mind, Donnie Trump?
Well, but sacrifice might be in the eye of the beholder. One of the things I've been saying is that risk, how much risk you take, that's in the eye of the beholder. Greatness, doing social good, that's in the eye of the beholder. And self-sacrifice might be in the eye of the beholder. People were saying that, oh, look what Trump sacrificed by being president. So you can always point to things and make an argument. I'm not saying it's a good argument, but you can make the argument. And so I wish we had a way to objectify heroism. It's not going to be easy doing that.
Okay, Frank Robinson had a comment about a divisive example of a divisive leader. I'll get his name wrong. Modi in India.
I don't know if you can let Frank talk about that. I'm not familiar.
I'm sure
with the
Frank
situation in
can.
India. Yeah.
Frank?
Yeah, well, India has something like 100 million Muslims, and Modi has the wonderful, great project of demonizing and even de-citizenizing the 100 million Muslims in India. Just, a wonderful project.
Wow. Isn't that shocking that that's still happening, that we elect world leaders? Putin is another one. I mean, it's just, they're everywhere. And I think it's because human beings, the reptilian brain loves tribal thinking. And we have to overcome, we need to develop a higher level consciousness. I think it is a level of consciousness that's more enlightened and inclusive and is willing to learn from history and is more humble with our knowing. And so I'm sorry to hear this is going on in India. Is there any resistance to this leader in India? Any resistance, pushback, I hope?
Actually, among the Hindus, not much. Modi has been a real quintessential player of the tyrant's playbook, quashing opposition, quashing free press, all of that. And there just aren't that many of the Hindus, which is the great majority in India, who are pushing back against it.
Wow. Okay. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah.
Thank you. Andy, you had raised your hand. You have a comment
Yeah,
or question?
to continue, about half the public, American public, considers some of the left-wing people like Al Sharpton, Hillary Clinton, the Squad, even Obama as being divisive. How do you reconcile that?
I think they might be right at times. I think a lot of the left wing is divisive and overly dualistic, overly binary in thinking, and is divisive. And I think a lot of the political left wing does a lot of harm and shoots itself in the foot by not being more inclusive. That doesn't mean that we should be tolerating the intolerant, but we do need to speak a more loving, gentler, more inclusive language. And our political rhetoric. What did Michelle Obama once say? That when they go low, we
go high.
We stay high. We should. So, and she was right. And yet we don't see that. We often see the left wing often being just as mean-spirited as the right wing. And I wish that weren't the case, because I don't think that's constructive. That's not going to get us anywhere.
Aya, you had a question? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
No, I'm sorry, go ahead.
that I'm often, you use this Williams James and listed about religious transformation things. The word spirituality, I'm from another place, and I'm always puzzled that can an atheist be a good person without being spiritual? That it's equated the spirituality always with something extraordinarily good. And like here you connected, I think it, or am I wrong, to being heroic or to your conception of heroes. But could you just give the definition of spirituality?
Yeah, I
Thank
think
you.
of, it's a good question, because I don't mean to talk about religion. I'm talking about more a secular spirituality that's based on, for me, the pillars of spirituality are forgiveness, gratitude, humility, tolerance, a lot of the qualities that atheists have and non-atheists have. It's independent of any religious belief system, really.
No higher power is part of that.
I don't think you need a higher power to be spiritual. I think the Buddhists
Oh, all right.
are spiritual without a higher power, although they often put Buddha on a kind of a deified pedestal sometimes. But Buddha is just a person, a wise person. So yeah, I don't mean to say spirituality and religion are interchangeable. They're not. And atheists are on the hero's journey and are capable of all the heroic transformations as anyone else. Absolutely.
Thank you.
So Donna had a question, whether you can see the chat. She sent you a message, I think. And Donna also asked a question, had her hand up, but then took it down.
Yeah, I don't see Donna's question on the chat box.
So Donna, could you
You leave?
no, Donna's still here. Donna had asked earlier about William James and talked about we talked about that message. So I don't know what to say. Jonas, you have your hand raised?
Donna's muted. Donna has to unmute herself.
Almost for an hour.
Okay, so I just saw your virtual hand now. Donna
Okay.
was unmuting, she said, so she had raised her hand. Donna, are you there?
You're muted. Donna, you need to unmute. Yeah, there you go.
I couldn't find myself. No, I just, I said, what a great presentation. It was enriching, informational, and very, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Oh, that's so nice of you, Donna. I'll
Yeah.
be sure to
And
send you a
Jonas-
check. Yeah.
I agree.
Jonas, you had something?
Yes, I'm saying, okay, every human looking for power and status. One way or the other, some get the power and become a leader. Bob, don't shake your head. And you become a leader. And you said in your talk that the leader or the person who is divisive is not a hero. Let me tell you, Muhammad is right now leading more than 2 billion people in the world. Is he a hero? Is he really a prophet? What's this? And he's not divisive. People are going with him. As soon as he started, people by force, by power, and he is the lowest person in the world. He is the most low-level person. He killed a lot of people. He lied a lot. He created Quran without reality and said it's God. He created the God in his own mind and all these things. Can you please explain to me is he, what you call him? A hero? To find more than 2 billion people call him a prophet, practically better than hero.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's a tough one. I'm not an Islamic scholar, and I hate to go outside my lane. But I've read parts of the Quran, and I think there is a morality in Islam that I respect that is similar to Judeo-Christian morality. Now, I just can't speak to Muhammad as being a hero or not. Again, it's in the eye of the beholder. So one person's hero is another person's villain. And I don't have anything more profound to say than that. And I'm really sorry, because this could be a book that we write. If you want to write a book about this with me, we should write a book about it, because this is a topic that begs to be studied and questions need to be asked. And I think it's complicated. I don't think there are simple answers here when it comes to spiritual heroes and among the world's major religions. I mean, the Bible is full of villainous activity, and a lot of evangelical Christians quote things from the Bible that might be disturbing to us, to some of us at least. And I don't know, it's hard to go with, it's hard to interpret what's going on there, other than there's a lot of subjectivity and people read what they want to read and interpret what they want to interpret. But we do know people are thirsty for heroes, and we're desperate. We seem to want someone to deify, to put up on a pedestal, to guide us, to lead us, to inspire us. And if we pick the wrong person, we better not pick the wrong person, because millions of people die whenever someone like that takes power and has a grip over millions of people, or you said billions in this case. We have to be very careful who we heroify.
Okay, then can you please read my book?
Yes,
We have to read. We have to write a book.
I'd love to.
Yeah, read my book.
Can you put in the chat the name of your book? Put it in the chat.
Okay.
So Eugene had a comment right along with this, that when people worship heroes, even the flaws are heroic.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
How that
So
works.
then, yeah, Andy, you have your hand raised.
Since we mentioned William James quite often, one of my novelists I respected, Brother Henry, and I respect him primarily because he could write the world's longest run-on sentences that went on for paragraphs, and there was lots of sides inside there. And someone who put so much thought into writing something, you have to respect.
Thanks for sharing that.
Okay, I don't see any other questions or other hands raised or comments. So again, I want to thank you, Professor Allison. Oh, somebody raised their hand. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just struck and curious about what's the difference between anti-hero and villain and hero?
Yeah, in fact, as our society has gotten more cynical, we see more anti-hero stories over the past 30, 40 years, like Deadpool and Iron Man. And so the anti-hero is defined as the hero who has some dark villainous qualities, but it's still a hero who gets the job done, but they have some unsavory characteristics, and they may compromise heroic ethics more so than in the traditional hero will. But and I think as our society has gotten more and more cynical and jaded with politics and with it's just the way things are going, that we see more anti-hero stories. It's harder to find a purely good hero anymore, and maybe that's not a bad thing, because we know that there are no purely good heroes out there.
Yeah.
Everyone's got their flaws, right? So but the anti-hero is that sort of in the limbo land between hero and villain, but is more of a hero because they do end up often getting the job done, but they're unsavory in some ways.
Thank you very much. It's been
Thank
very,
you.
very
Thank you.
interesting.
Again, thank you, Scott. I don't see any other questions or comments. I do want to thank you for taking time with us today. I hope we haven't worn you out with questions.
No,
we do
this has been
appreciate your time.
fun. Thanks for having me. I enjoyed talking to you and interacting and wish you well. And I'm honored to have shared today. Thanks.